From Worldwide Technology, this is the AI Proving Ground podcast. Today, artificial intelligence is no longer just predicting cyber attacks, it's launching them. Systems that act on their own are entering enterprise networks at scale, and the same autonomy that promises efficiency can erase the guardrails that once protected us. Security leaders are now asking themselves a different question, not how do we secure AI, but how do we secure everything AI touches? So on today's show, Zscaler's head of AI innovation, Phil T, and WWT's VP of Global Cyber, Konrad, warn that every boardroom deploying AI is also deploying new risk, whether they admit it or not. Because when models start making choices and taking actions across systems, every prompt becomes a potential attack vector. So when your organization deploys its next autonomous AI system, the real question won't be whether it can deliver results. It will be whether you can trust what it decides to do once you hit go. So let's dive in. Hey, Phil T, thanks for joining us today on the AI Proving Ground podcast. How are you?
Feeling great. Glad to be here.
And Konrad, always one of my favorites. Welcome to the show. How are you today?
I'm doing fantastic. Great to be with you again today.
Yeah. Well, let's start. Phil, I got to say, a little disappointed. Head of AI innovations at Zscaler. I kind of expect you to show up in a white lab coat, that type of thing. I love that title. Can you just describe for us a little bit about what that means, head of AI innovations? That seems like a ton to unpack.
Yeah, and there is a lot to unpack there. So, what I would say is my remit at Zscaler is to, think the unthinkable. It's a crossover research into products area. I have a small team of dedicated data scientists. In fact, my lab, even though I'm not wearing the white lab coat, is around the corner from where I'm talking to you from, and at least one PhD per person in that room. So these are folks that are very, very, very deep in the forefront of NLP and AI. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to see how we can leverage what is an incredible data asset at Zscaler, because we sit in the middle of the internet, and use that to build tools and new novel model architectures. So it's not just a question of agentic or fine-tuning models. We're building novel ways of doing NLP to help people get ahead of the cyber threat, and for that matter, also the IT operations challenge as well. We're not constraining ourselves just to SecOps. And obviously, here we are in 2025. Cyber is more important than it ever has been. Not that it was ever not important, because we live in a very uncertain world. So we think of ourselves as trying to take the forefront of AI and put it to good use in sort of defending our customers' citadels.
Yeah. Chris, I'm curious, based on what Phil just said and just describing his team, sounds like an impressive bunch for sure. What does that signal to the market? Should a lot of organizations have this type of mindset in teams as it relates to AI innovation, how to secure it, so on and so forth?
Yeah, well, 100%. I mean, I think it's one of the greatest innovations, obviously, in our lifetime, but it's also an opportunity for the attackers. And, at it worldwide, we see AI through I'll call it a pretty practical lens. I mean, candidly, it's the sharpest double-edged sword we have today. And it's even more of a powerful tool for defenders when it's used well.
Couldn't agree more. And, look, I mean, I literally Monday and Tuesday, I was at a conference in California, and they had, the CISOs from Anthropic and OpenAI. And they were very candid about the fact that, their tool is both their greatest asset and also their greatest threat.
Well, let's dive into the meat of the conversation. I know we're talking today more so on the agentic AI sphere and what that means from a security perspective. I do want to level set a bit, Chris. Maybe we can start with you. I feel like agents get a wide variety of definitions these days. So can you tell us how agents differ from traditional AI and then what that means from a security perspective?
Yeah, no, happy to dive into it. And I'd love to get, Phil's insights on this as well. I mean, it's the biggest shift is autonomy. I mean, traditional AI predicts, agentic AI, it acts. And it doesn't just analyze the data. It takes action across all of your systems and apps and workflows. And that autonomy introduces an entirely new threat vector. So whether it could be, prompt injection, it could be the tool misuse, which is a big problem, data exfil, and it really does force every person inside of security organizations to rethink trust at every layer. So whether it's guardrails that are built for traditional generative AI simply weren't designed for this. They break when AI systems make decisions and take actions on their own. And this is where things need to evolve. This is where the security model has to evolve.
Couldn't agree more, actually, Chris. Here's the thing. So we're all human beings. I promise you, I'm not an avatar. Although I would say that, wouldn't I? So we're all human beings, and we come with this wonderful thing called a moral compass. And maybe it's a side debate as to whether or not it's a universal thing in humanity, but for the large part, we come with a moral compass. And what that means is mostly we're all trying to do the right thing most of the time. And so the number of bad actors is really a tiny percentage. And here's the other thing about bad actors. They go to sleep. They take time off to, watch whatever they watch on Netflix when they're not, extorting, money from banks and people and so on and so forth. So it's not a continuous thing. Agents do not have a moral compass, and they don't sleep. And they, to the best of my knowledge, don't watch Netflix and take time off. So you've got this kind of dual thing going on that, agents have no way of self-restraint. They will follow their mission. And if their mission goes down a path that is, not a good path, they're not going to stop and think again and go, well, maybe I shouldn't be, copying these secrets or wherever it might be. And the second thing is they're relentless and infinitely scalable, which, is a benefit when you're trying to use them to automate and do work. But in the context of cyber, that's just going to exponentiate the volume of attacks and exponentiate the potential criticality of some of those attacks as well. So it is a very, very, very different type of landscape that we're talking about here.
Yeah, there's Phil, if I could just maybe add one thing to that, it's, here at Worldwide, security is embedded into everything that we do and everything that we sell, candidly. And our mission, if you will, is to secure that AI ecosystem. And we call it from ship to cloud. No more naked AI. So we can't be putting AI infrastructure in organizations without thinking out of security. You go back years ago around the software development lifecycle. We were, trying to have a seat at the table to make sure that security was integrated into that development lifecycle. Same thing with AI. Let's not have any conversations without thinking how to secure it throughout the whole cycle.
Yeah. Well, Phil, I love the idea. You're talking about how these bad actors, they, in some cases, many cases, are humans too. I love the idea of kind of picturing them watching Netflix, whether it's Is It Cake or Bridgerton, or just to give you an insight into my algorithm there. Phil, I want to share a study that I just read recently. It was from Cornell University, showed that poisoning as little as 2% of agents' training traces, can embed a backdoor capable of leaking confidential data with over 80% success. So if just 2% is enough to bypass some of these guardrails, does this mean that we have to have a complete restructure of like how we're approaching security and agentic AI? Because I know we also a lot of times talk about, hey, just get to the basics, and that is going to help you a tremendous amount. Or is it completely rethinking?
Yeah, I'd say a couple of things. And look, I work and represent Zscaler, and this company has been enormously successful on the basis of its zero trust architecture. And I don't think the need for a zero trust approach or the architecture that we have gets less. I think it gets more. I think you have to, and maybe it's building on Chris's comment, you have to allow no naked AI. So if you think about the flow, whether it's an agent or a human going to a language model, it involves the exchange of natural language prompts and getting data back as responses to that. You can't allow those those communications to be ad hoc and willy-nilly, to use a British phrase. You've got to thread them through a secure channel, which is precisely the principle behind zero trust. But once you do that, then you are looking at a very different category of information that you're having to inspect to assert security, because you're dealing with natural language. And so this is where you have to have AI inspecting AI. And, certainly, we've been making noises about this in the market, making moves with offerings like AI Guard, which is essentially precisely that. But it's that type of approach that you have to take, because you need to be able to detect when a prompt has been poisoned or the training data has been poisoned, to be able to take action. And to detect that, you need to be in the path.
Yeah, I do want to dive into AI Guard a little bit more, but first, Chris, can you talk to us about maybe how the concepts or understanding of zero trust has evolved since Gen AI kind of exploded onto the scene, if it has evolved at all?
Quite a bit. I mean, I think candidly, Zscaler is a great example of how zero trust is being reimagined for today. I mean, their zero trust exchange is infused with AI. So you think about three things there. It's whether it's AI-driven threat detection, so that spots that zero-day attack. You've got automated policy enforcement and proactive breach prediction. And then you also have, an AI-powered data discovery, which is a big deal. That keeps that sensitive information safe, even if it's inside encrypted traffic.
Yeah, I mean, that's right. And when I showed up at Zscaler, it was definitely one of the things that was a very pleasant discovery for me, is that Zscaler is an AI forward company. I mean, we've been doing it for quite a while. Whether it's instant verdict is a classic example, on payloads, being able to detect whether something is malicious or not. We have language models that help with that.
Yeah, and I think this is what makes our partnership unique. So, I mean, we work with you side by side. We do work together in our Advanced Technology Center, and also our cyber range, where we can do this type of testing, and we can do the validations. We can do the integration of these guardrails with, it could be Microsoft, it could be other ecosystem partners. And the result that we really get is an end-to-end zero trust posture that not only protects the AI, but everything it touches.
Okay, let's go into a little bit more from AI Guard and Zscaler's perspective. Phil, how is that adding new layers of protection? Maybe walk us through a little bit of the solution and the value that it provides enterprise organizations to defend against all these new emerging threat vectors.
Absolutely. So, I mean, very specifically, AI Guard really adds the capabilities we already have to a degree for public model access into private model access. So, if you're building an agentic application, obviously one of the things that a lot of our customers like to do is host their own models, so that they're not dependent upon going to public foundational models to build their agentic frameworks. Now, when you're doing that, one of the things that you're going to be very concerned about is precisely what we talked about earlier on. So prompt poisoning, malicious use of the large language model, hijacking of the language model for uses that it's not designed for, and many other different sort of bad vectors, if you will, in terms of the use of the model. And so what we have is the ability to do deep inspection on the prompts and determine whether or not the prompt is clean, whether or not it is a prompt that the system is designed to work with, and whether or not it's intended as part of the application. So, for example, I might set up a HR application that's agentic. And what I wouldn't want that HR application to be able to do is to allow, say, somebody who works for me to work out how much I earn. And there are lots of ways in which you could imagine that an agent might go rogue and do that, because remember, these things are autonomous and have a degree of intelligence. So you want to be able to not just deal with a very simple prompt like "tell me how much Filthy earns," but also much more tangential stuff like, how many cups of coffee could Phil buy in a month, assuming that a cup of coffee costs $5. They're sort of roundabout ways of getting answers to questions. And what we're able to do is, by the use of language models, determine the intent, the sentiment, and the action that will happen from a prompt, and then allow us to apply policy against that. We can detect gibberish, we can detect inappropriate responses from the models, we can control language. So we give a lot of power in the hands of our customers to be able to essentially put policy around prompting. And that's what AI Guard is. So that it's policy around prompting for private models alongside the ZIA offering, which is policy around prompting for public models.
Yeah, Chris, you can see how autonomous agents working with each other, that can quickly compound to create a risky profile right there. Maybe build a little bit on what Phil talked about, with AI Guard, and how can we use that, and how should we be thinking about that type of policy, whether it's access, identity, et cetera.
Yeah, and I think when we think about guardrails in general, I mean, it's a common concern, and we hear it across every vertical and every sector around the world. But to be honest with you, I mean, if it's just not true if it's done right. And we prove this out every day in our labs in our advanced technology center, that you can protect without slowing down the innovation, but you need to put the effort into doing it. And you've heard me say it on these podcasts in the past and at other events, that you got to really focus on the fundamentals. You got to really focus on the basics. You need to test it. So security doesn't have to be that friction point. And it could really fuel when it's built into the design phase that we talked about just a few minutes ago. So yeah, it's a common concern, but you got to fundamentally go through it. You just have to make sure that you can prove it out and do your testing.
Yeah. Chris, I want to go back to something that you said that I thought was interesting. You called AI, I believe you're referring to AI as the sharpest double-edged sword we have. I love the way you put that. I'd never heard that before, but excellent way to describe it. So let's flip the script here. How is AI going to help accelerate the effectiveness of the concept of zero trust? What can it do to make sure that it's working more efficiently or more effectively?
Yeah, just from an overall operationalization and scaling standpoint. From there, that's really where the work begins. And our job at WWT is to help our customers turn these great ideas that they have into the outcomes, and safely and at scale. And so how we're doing it today is that we'll work together with partners like Zscaler. So we'll run these joint briefings and workshops. We can do the full scale testing across our ATC and the cyber range. So the leaders of these organizations can see the security implications before they go live. And so taking that and taking the governance, taking the red teaming, all that is important. And you have to pressure test it. And not just from a technological standpoint, but, as Phil talked about earlier, but from an ethical standpoint and operationally. And that's how the trust is earned. That's how the adoption and the operationalization of it really starts to begin at scale. And I think this is where we are as an industry today, is people really trying to figure out, okay, now what? How do I get this to work across the organization, and how can we get it to be done in a secure manner? But that's exactly where we are. I don't know, Phil, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, I mean, I was going to say, because you prompted me, no pun intended. to think about one. I told you I was not an avatar. To think about one particular concern that always goes through my mind. Now, very popular sort of agentic architectures. If you think about how you make use of language models inside of an agent, typically you reserve the planner agent. So this is the central coordinator. People give it different names. That is responsible for taking the task and then working out what subtasks need to be executed in order to fulfill the mission of that task. And usually that's the more complex bit of reasoning. So if you're using a template like React, the reasoning and action type paradigm, that's where you're going to want to use more of a foundational model to build those plans. So quite often you end up with an architecture, an agentic architecture, which uses a combination of external and internal models. So expensive external models for the planning, maybe smaller language models for the individual agents that are processing a much more restricted set of data from one of the tools that they may be making use of. So you end up with this scenario where you've got a mix of external and internal models. Now, where I think that's a particular challenge is, whether it's from a security point of view or from a privacy perspective, sort of not sharing or leaking PII information out there. That's where you really need a framework that is able to surveil not just the internal, but the external prompting that your application is doing. And you need to think very, very hard about how you ensure the guardrails so you don't get a lazy or a sloppy programmer, accidentally sending data that it shouldn't be sending to an external foundational model or frontier model, if you prefer that sort of terminology, rather than the sort of the interior hosted, smaller, simpler models. And, that's a very complicated scenario. You're layering a complex architecture on top of a complex application, and you can see where this can very quickly go wrong unless you've got the tools in place to be able to, I go back to this sort of deep prompt inspection type paradigm.
This episode is supported by Okta. Okta provides identity and access management solutions to securely connect your people to the right technologies. Simplify user authentication with Okta's reliable identity platform.
Yeah, Chris, maybe make the case for us. I know a lot of people might, think of guardrails as something that would slow you down or potentially make you not move as quickly. But I know here at WWT, we like to make the case that, those guardrails and that governance can actually lead to acceleration. Can you make the pitch for us as to why that might be the case?
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, as I talked about earlier, I mean, so many people worry about the guardrails and slowing the innovation down or the productivity down, on that. As I mentioned earlier, it is a common concern. But at the end of the day, is like we've created an environment inside of WWT with our Advanced Technology Center, with our AI Proving Ground, and with our cyber range where people can test, they can do multi-OEM integrations, they can work with this at scale without having to worry about breaking something. And so for us and our customers and our partners like Zscaler can leverage this, access these environments to really be, as I said earlier, to be the fuel and to really get in and build it into the design phase and make sure that everybody's getting what they want out of it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we talk about, kind of pushing those pilots into production with safety. Phil, let's jump to something that could also be a potential hindrance here, and that's, the regulatory environment. What are we seeing on regulatory environment or policy as it relates to AI and security? What should CISOs or security teams be looking out for or thinking of so that they're in position to keep moving when new regulation comes out?
Well, it's complicated. And, I hate to say, but I think that half the problem with it is that you've got a very different approach to regulation around AI, depending upon the nationality or the geographic domain that you're in. So, very famously, there is a tension between the US and Europe. The US wants a kind of a more freewheeling approach. The Europeans are trying to, heavily legislate around the use of AI and control of privacy in particular, and sovereignty of data. And it's an enormously complex place. So we don't really know where it's gonna land. And we do know that there's going to be a lot of change, and we do know there's going to be a lot of chopping and changing of the various different approaches as these evolve. So really, at the end of the day, the advice that I would have to give to CISOs or anybody building, AI-based or AI-inspired applications is you absolutely have to have the ability to make radical changes about what data goes where as the regulatory landscape evolves, and maybe take a sort of a almost defensive approach to it. And I kind of go back to that example I was giving you earlier, where a very common approach in building agentic frameworks is to reserve the frontier foundational models to the planning agent and do everything else with internally hosted stuff, where sovereignty and privacy is less of an issue. With those types of models, it doesn't go away, but it's less of an issue because it's inside of your environments. And design privacy first. So whatever goes out of the planning agent should be asserted to not contain things like social security numbers or email addresses or phone numbers or whatever it might be. And without sort of sounding over pluggy about this, for Zscaler, that's where you need a zero trust approach to how the box are being shipped around.
Yeah, Phil, I just want to jump on that real quick, because what we see the same thing. I mean, it's every feeder around the world, every region is tightening all of their rules. So from the EU AI Act to new data localization laws in the US and Asia. I mean, so it really takes organizations to design responsible AI, as you said it earlier, frameworks that keeps them compliant without losing the speed that they want to be able to move at. And this is what excites me about Zscaler. I mean, the whole AI data protection platform is a great example of that. And just how you go out and do your automatically do the discovery, you go out and you classify, all the controls and data across channels. And as I said earlier, even in that encrypted traffic. And so this is where really organizations can maintain the privacy, the compliance, and the performance all at once.
Well, you're spot on, Chris. And at the end of the day, you need to automate as much as possible of the data classification and control and so on and so forth. And that is precisely what our platform uses. And it's kind of even worse than what I said, because you focus on nation state legislation. We have our very own quasi member of the European Union in the United States, being California. Takes a very different approach to regulation than Texas or even where I'm sat in New Jersey. And it is an enormously complicated matrix that you have to deal with as you think about sort of data in these types of applications.
Phil or Chris, have we found a good way that we can kind of advise organizations on how to stay on top of that rapidly evolving matrix? I mean, it seems almost as difficult as staying up to date with all the new AI innovations. So, what is it that we can do to make sure that we're plugged in, that we see what's coming on the horizon, and that we're able to act accordingly? Any good tips from that standpoint? Phil, we go to you.
Yeah, I mean, it's work. And you need effort and focus and direction from senior leadership. At Zscaler, we have a team in our legal department of compliance officers that worry about this. I mean, I spend time myself on a very regular basis talking with that team about what it is that we're doing and making sure that we're not inadvertently crossing any kind of line from a regulatory or legal perspective. And you have to have that mindset of, think before you transact from an AI point of view. And, it's just, I hate to say it's like the quickest way to get into trouble is, think that there's nothing to worry about.
Yeah. And I think for us, Brian, it's a few things. One is, understanding, first of all, from an assessment standpoint, what levels of risk are organizations operating at, not only technically, but also programmatically. How are they aligned with different standards, frameworks, and regulations that matter to them? is important, but we can also come in at a board level and give them board briefings on what's important and things they need to be looking out for. As Phil talked about a minute ago, like what are the nation states we need to be concerned at? What's happening right now across the landscape there? And then take them into, as I said earlier, around briefings and workshops to really nail down exactly what it is they're trying to accomplish, what's the outcome that they're looking to achieve, and then working with our partners like Zscaler to help design the right solution for them.
No, absolutely. Well, all of this kind of lends itself toward, towards a bigger picture of just what comes next and what do organizations do to keep pace, whether it's with the evolving nature of agents, whether it's with regulation, or whether it's with, just a rapid change in infrastructure and solutions that people are faced with. Chris, any signals that you might be looking for over the next, couple of months to call it a year, or maybe as we get into the bulk of 2026? What type of signals are you going to be looking for that would encourage you that more organizations are safe and secure with their AI strategies?
Yeah, great question on that. So, I mean, obviously, as we said throughout here, the biggest shift we're seeing is that AI is no longer optional. It's a strategic initiative. It's a strategic imperative for security operations. And if we get it right, AI will close the talent gap, which is a big concern. It'll help strengthen operational resilience for organizations and frees up our best defenders to focus on the hardest problems. But I guess from a signals standpoint, maybe there's three things that come top of mind, I guess. And Phil, I'd love to get your insights on this. Agree or disagree? Just the rise of autonomous AI agents in production environments. We talked about it earlier. I mean, that's one. The one that I'm most concerned about is the weaponization of AI by attackers. And it's getting more and more difficult every single day, and just the convergence of AI, safety, and cybersecurity in the regulations globally. Or that's what I'm looking for. Phil, what about you?
Yeah, well, it's that second point that I think is, not that anything you said I radically disagree with, Chris, but that second point about the weaponization is deeply serious. Nobody decrypts passwords anymore, right? I mean, this is, breaching physical security. Physical security is very, very good. It doesn't happen, but it's extraordinarily rare. The weakest link in the chain from a security point of view are the human beings. And, phishing and deep fakes, which have gone from, I'm a Nigerian prince, please give me your bank account, to stuff that is genuinely very, very, very hard for smart people to work out as fakes. And this is it's gonna, whether it's faking out biometrics, ever increasingly sort of convincing man in the middle attacks. I mean, all of this stuff is just going to go up and up and up. And it turns out that your best bet in terms of defending yourself against that kind of thing is AI itself, that's able to spot watermarks and so on and so forth. That would give it a chance of being able to say, hey, look, this is a suspicious video. It's not a real video from your bank manager.
So what do they say, Phil? I'm not hacking anymore. I'm just logging in.
So the risk is using AI, and the risk is also not using AI. Is kind of what you're saying here.
Yeah, it is. And, look, I mean, I was just at a conference, and it's a regular annual thing. It brings together a load of CISOs and CXOs into a room with industry leaders. And it is definitely true to say that you go back 2 years, there was a deal of skepticism about AI in the enterprise. That's completely gone away now. Everybody is leaning in to building these applications. But, the other, and I find this so funny, the other conversation that was very, very, very clear was, this is .com 2.0 and the bubble's going to burst, and, maybe this all goes away on its own. But here's the thing. When the .com 1.0 bubble burst, did that stop us using the internet? Did that, did that make those use cases go away? Far from it. We're now beyond our wildest dreams, adopted and connected and, internet works and so on and so forth. And that's my point about AI, which is, this is a change that is indelible. It's not going away. And we better get our act together as an industry sooner rather than later about how we do that safely.
And I think we've come a long way from that era. Just from a security standpoint, we've learned a lot over the years in that. And I think now if enterprises, as we look at this and we're aware of what's happened in the past around the .com era and so forth, if enterprises treat AI security as a first mover advantage, not a compliance chore or something we have to go through, we'll be the ones that are leading the next era of what I'll call that digital trust.
Yeah, totally agree. And here's the other thing as well. Like, if you don't have enough nightmares, I mean, it is Halloween coming up here in the US, so maybe I'll throw another one in. You start marrying quantum with AI, and where basically forget about any encryption. So cryptographically significant quantum computers are way more likely than general purpose quantum computers. But you imagine that alongside with AI, so agents that are smart and can walk through any wall you put up. Yeah, we've got a lot on our hands.
Well, I mean, I was going to close on that question. Phil, act as if, you got your white lab coat on. Well, I guess at risk of sounding like I'm prompting your avatar here, act as if you are, got your white lab coat on. You mentioned quantum. What else? Think kind of longer term, or maybe quantum's not even that much long term. Are we talking defending against AGI, quantum, physical AI? Like where is the puck going long term that's going to present security risks? And Chris, you can build off what Phil says as well.
I mean, I could definitely have an argument with myself about this because one of the things I started referring to Gen AI as Reg AI now, because it's not generative, it's regurgitative. There are probably a handful of avenues which I think there are going to be massive advances on. Agentic frameworks are going to continue to evolve. They're going to get smarter, they're going to get better. We're going to come up with, whether, emerging protocols like MCP and A2A, start to, bring agent registries, agent authentication, all that kind of stuff is going to continue to evolve. So there's going to be a huge advances in this. Second thing is, we're squeezing the lemon with transformer technology at the moment. And arguably, we're starting to see the very beginnings of, we're not getting much better. So ChatGPT 5 famously 10x the number of parameters from about 1.7 trillion to nearly 60 trillion parameters. My math's not quite right there, but whatever. So that is a huge advance in terms of the complexity of the model. Is it much better? Jury's out a little bit on that. Some people say yes, some people say no, depending upon whether you work for OpenAI or not. And so you sort of feel like there needs to be some breakthrough, some deep seek moments with novel sort of model architectures. And then I would say the third thing is quantum. I'm a theoretical physicist by background, and I have all sorts of reasons for not believing in a general purpose quantum computer, which is not the same as believing in a cryptographically significant quantum computer or single purpose quantum computers, changing the game on some very traditionally computer heavy tasks like decryption, as an example. And I think when that starts to come into the mix as well, we're going to start to see some very, very, very interesting changes needed in architecture to be able to deal with that.
Yeah, and if I maybe just to jump on, Brian, as you said, just on the things that maybe keep me up at night, just kind of looking ahead a little bit, maybe just outside of the AI realm, and Phil talked about it briefly here, just around infrastructure modernization. I mean, dormant nation state, persistent, inside your own network. How are you going out and identifying vulnerable network equipment, end-of-life hardware, end-of-life software, and just making sure you've got a full spectrum hardware configuration assessments across everything you have, data centers, campus, OT environments. To me, that's a big deal. And for going into next year, as I look, that's the top of mind. Quantum computing is obviously there. And as we said throughout this podcast, just securing AI. For me, those are the top three.
It's an interesting point you made there, Chris, because North Korea don't make and supply routers to corporate America, but then people who do. And, you do have to worry about that. I mean, for maybe it's 20 years, maybe it's longer than that since a major refresh in networking infrastructure took place. And so there's a lot of stuff gathering dust in the data centers that needs looking at.
Right.
Well, Chris and Phil, thank you so much for taking the time today out of your busy schedules to join us and talk about, an important topic of securing AI, but we covered a lot: agents, regulatory environment, what's coming next. So it was a fantastic conversation. Thank you to the both of you for stopping by.
My pleasure. Great to talk with you all.
Yeah, great conversation, Phil. Brian, as always, great job, and we'll talk soon for sure.
Absolutely.
Yes, thanks all.
Okay, thanks to Chris and Phil for joining us on today's episode. A few key lessons stand out. First, AI autonomy changes everything. It introduces a level of scale and speed in both defense and attack that traditional security models were never built to handle. Second, the guardrails still matter. Security baked in early, tested, validated, and continuously monitored becomes acceleration, not just friction. And third, this landscape will not slow down for policy to catch up. Regulations are moving, attackers are adapting, and the organizations that stay ahead are the ones treating AI security as a strategic advantage, not just a compliance task. The bottom line, as your enterprise pushes AI further into production, remember that trust is not guaranteed by the technology. It is earned by how you secure it. If you like this episode of the AI Proving Ground podcast, please follow, rate, or review us wherever you listen. And join us next time as we continue exploring how AI is reshaping the enterprise. And you can always catch additional episodes or related content to this episode on WWT.com. This episode was co-produced by Naz Baker and Kara Kuhn. Our audio and video engineer is John Knobloch. My name is Brian Felt, and we'll see you next time.